I'll stand up, then you don't feel alone standing up in a few minutes. Good evening. This is cozy, a little bit cold, but you can sit close to each other if you want. Welcome to this Passaporta evening with Jessie Ball. You know why you're here. Because you know you will encounter a fascinating writer, a truly unique voice, and I know it's a cliche, yes, and I know it's often said about writers in introductions, but I've checked. I've been browsing through my preparations, and I don't just not say it lightly. In fact, I haven't used the words before, but I'll do it now, and happily so, and again, he is a truly unique voice. He's the author of more than 10 books, I've lost count, short stories, poems, long and shortlisted. He currently is writer in residence bij het Letterenfonds in Amsterdam, loud and busy Amsterdam, and the Dutch translation of his last novel, The Diver's Game, Duikerspel, is the perfect excuse for us to talk to him here. Although I do think the conversation, welcome, the conversation will lead us towards that other great novel, Senses, every now and then, because both of them are somehow entwined. Ladies and gentlemen, Jessie Ball. If you would please lead us and take us straight into the fascinating and slightly disturbing world of The Diver's Game by reading the opening pages. And if you don't mind, you can stand up, then people can look up to you.
Lethe. If we look for her, if we run up the stairs, cast open her door and look in her bed, she is not there. If we dash down the steps, turn a corner, pass her befuddled father, who cannot see us, and go to the little table that she loves so well, the one by the window, she is not there. She's not there. A plate and some crumbs, an empty glass. Out we go, into the street and up ahead. Can it be? We see her beneath linden trees, swaying as a child does because the morning sways. Because when it is the morning, isn't everything swaying? It's only the old who are stiff, who can no longer feel the world's slight breath. Lethe. She is looking at her feet as she walks, watching them. How unpredictable they are. Are they hers? And thinking, what will she do today? Her feet move beneath and we with them. And suddenly we have reached the train. Nimbly up the steps she goes, the train doors open, and there is a place for her between two men who stare straight ahead, as if into nothing. They are not alone. The train is full of such as they. Lethe takes her place among them. She looks straight ahead, but her mind is humming. This is a trip she takes each morning, and meanwhile, always meanwhile, she is elsewhere. The doors close, the train shoves forward, and over the loudspeaker comes a voice she has heard 1,000 times. Instinctively, she grasps the gray rubber device on her belt and straightens up. She stares ahead, chin up, almost proudly. A deep and reassuring voice, the ever-familiar voice, one she has heard her whole life. It shudders the speakers, and everyone in the car chants softly. A citizen for the life of him or her or he or she that keeps a mask on the belt or arm need never fear the streets. If trouble comes like quad scum, your mask put on, your mask put on. The gas shall flow, a cloud to grow, and lay them low, the lowest at our feet. A chorus of horns plays and the car is quiet again. It travels on, ever forward. That's the direction of society, forward. All those who try to send it back are ground beneath the wheels. Hasn't it always been so? At every station, the joyful chorus peals. When you are so used to saying something, isn't it a kind of gladness to let it roll unexamined from your lips? They stood in that tincture, a thin gladness to be sure. You could never touch it or really feel it. until the train doors opened at the center exchange, and out the passengers poured, so many. You would never think the train could hold so many. They were not in wild colors, these citizens, although of course they wore the latest fashions, and each to the last bore a finely made mask upon the hip. Have you ever seen so many gas masks in one place, and every one nicely worn from use, every one the tool of an expert? It was a kind of modern-day Sparta. Wouldn't you say that? Wouldn't you agree? And today it was the day before Ogai's Day. There hadn't been an Ogai's Day, not for 50 years. So no one knew how it would go.
Yeah. Shall I help you? Go ahead. Yeah. Good. So you read that from the book, but there's another page lying underneath. What is that?
Oh. Maybe we wait until...
Yeah, we'll wait, but I just want to know what it is.
It's a page from the book that I'm writing this minute.
And you will read it?
I shall. At the appropriate moment.
I've never met writers who do that. While they're still writing, they keep it to themselves.
I just started writing the book on this week, so.
You want to try it out? Is that it?
No, it's finished. When I write it down, it's finished.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. That's easy.
Yeah.
It sounds easy. So you gave us the first pages of the Diver's Game. You say a modern Sparta. That's what it says, wouldn't you think? Or something like that. I've tried to find the correct word, like, of course, a dystopian world, unheimlich, if you want. But then, unheimlich means close to something you know. And then no word fit the description for me. And then I thought, yeah, it's our world, isn't it?
The books that I read are always just about the present, the exact present. And I think the current media environment makes it so that people can behave in a way that I think is intrinsically brutal and not feel it. And so the terms with which people understand their lives are essentially terms that completely reduce and enervate their bodies and reduce their nerves into nothing, so that they can behave and bear up day in and day out. And so if I want to write about the world, it has to be as if it is a different world, because it has to be defamiliarized for it to be seen.
Yeah, but it's not that different from our world.
No, I mean, in the United States you have millions of people in prison, more people in prison than in China, in the US. 6 million. And not to mention the mental hospitals, which are potentially even worse, many of them privately run. If a court order sends you to a mental hospital, you might never get out. At least in prison, you can get parole or whatever. So, and which is not to mention the entire swaths of cities where there are no grocery stores. The United States is in many ways a third world country.
And then you haven't even mentioned the refugees.
Haven't even gotten there.
Yeah. We also have that, do you know?
Yeah, I've heard.
We're not very proud of what we do in Greece, and so it's not, you don't have to. I always get that feeling from people from the US who say we're not doing too well around other places in the world aren't doing perfectly either. Maybe some explanation for people who haven't read it yet, to follow the conversation. So the society is divided in this book into two worlds. People are divided into two categories, I should say, and the pads and the quads. Very simple rules. The pads carry gas masks and canisters, like we've seen, and they have the permission to kill the quads. The quads have no rights, and they live in areas surrounded by guards. They are recognizable because they are branded on their cheek, and they have they miss a thumb, right? One thumb is cut off. You use the word refugees in this book explicitly. Now, often in what you write, a lot more is not said than well said, and it's vague. But this word struck me because it's a very explicit word, refugees. Why did you use it?
Well, I find that the world of literature is sometimes so far from the world of politics in the United States that over time, I would say the earlier books that I wrote, I was much more elliptical in how I would explain things or how I would set things up. And so people simply couldn't notice, they couldn't perceive that it was the world that or the problem that I was talking about. For instance, Silence Once Begun, which a novel of mine from the past, is about confession. It's a book about the fact of confession as a legal strategy, whatever you could call it, which is completely insane that if you say that you did a crime, it's just accepted and then you're, put in jail or killed or whatever for it. Because if you said that you were, the king of Spain, people are not going to believe you. That doesn't just go and become the fact of the matter. But somehow an admission of guilt is enough, when it really should be the facts of the case, not the fact that you just confess. And in Japan, there's it's like 98% conviction rate based upon confession, and including the fact that if you're arrested, after the police can keep you for 3 weeks before they have to release you. So obviously, it's pretty easy confining someone for 3 weeks to get them to confess, right?
There are ways to do that, yeah.
You're right. We have ways of making you confess. And so the book was about this issue of jurisprudence, that it simply should not be that a confession can lead to a conviction. However, in the United States, for instance, we have an attorney general who is, he's on behalf of all the prosecutors in the country. But we don't have a person who's in charge of all the defending attorneys, who's like trying to make really the best case for all the people who are accused. So I don't know. I published that book, and not one review investigated this at all, that this was the point of the book in any way. So over time,
how did that feel? You felt misunderstood?
No, it's just frustrating because it's a different vision of what literature should be. I think that I don't believe that literature should be entertainment. I think that and I'm not saying that it should solve the social problems or can solve social problems, but I think that it should change how people think and feel. And I think that it should be uncomfortable and difficult to read a book, and you should have to contend with the ideas that are in the book. And in the U.S., it's more that the novels are entertainment, and so then they're treated as entertainment, which means that they're facetious, they're trivial. It doesn't really. So, to answer your question, Refugee was really to force people to see what the book was. But
I want to go back to your story because it was just frustrating. Okay, not one review read it correctly. Or as you wanted it to be read. Maybe readers did.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. One would hope,
Yeah.
And I do think that a book exists as text, is published by publishers as text. It's an idea. It was in someone's mind, the author's mind, but only in the author's mind because it existed in the culture, in the surrounding human beings, animals, the entire atmosphere around the person. So it was in the atmosphere, then it entered the person, and then it comes out into a text. Then it goes out into the world. I don't know that it's that important that the book as such persists in the world past the point at which it is transformed by the bodies of the readers. I think their behavior, having read the book, becomes the book.
Okay, I understand.
Just as folk tales pass through.
Yeah, but still, if you feel like, okay, this is what I want to tell, this is what I want to convey, this is the idea of the book, because there's first an idea and then there's the book. Is that how it works?
Not really for me. It's more that maybe there's an image, and then I write the book not knowing what it will be.
Okay. And then it's there, and then you saw what it was about, and then you would prefer people to read or to understand what it was about. So that's why it becomes gradually during the years more explicit, because in Senses you even, you explicitly say before it begins what it is about.
Well, that's because Senses is about my brother who had Down syndrome, and I don't know how it is here, but in America, this is the subject of Down syndrome is one that no one wants to think about or feel or confront, because these children are not really allowed to exist anymore, because people screen for it and then they don't have them.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a subject, if I didn't hold it up, then it would be ignored. Yeah.
So you really wanted to say, this is what it's about.
On behalf of my my brother and all these people like him, yeah. I think so. I think I hate introductions. I skip them. I never read introductions. So
I've read it. I've read the introduction.
It's possible for people to skip the introductions if they're of that mind. But I think, and I also think to some degree about introductions, which would probably include my own introduction there, that authors are the last people qualified to talk about the books they've written.
Then what are we doing here? No, but I thought it was interesting though, because like in the first answer or the second answer, you say I wanted to convey that idea. So books aren't just for fun. Books are to, you immediately say, I don't want to say that it has to change the world, literature, but you do actually, right?
Well, you would like to move towards a world where there's less causing of suffering.
Mm-hmm. And this might help.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Because, so we're back to the refugees. You chose that word explicitly, and it's there. It's the prisoners together with the refugees and their descendants who are in who are the quads. Is it okay that the two are here together? They're very different. They're very different of tone, but I also encountered missing thumbs in Senses. And I also found, of course, the branding and the tattooing. They kind of entwined. Was that something that happened by accident?
Well, I think that it's a fallacy to consider any books that an author writes as being truly separate from one another. I think in some ways every single thing that you write and do is of a single piece. And so, although those books, they have aesthetic parameters and things like conventions, like the plot of this one, the plot of that one, truly they're sequential iterations of the philosophy that I feel about the world and the things that I think. For Senses, it had to do with, because the book is about my brother, it had to do with a lot of things that I thought as a boy when I believed that I would, when I was grown, be the one to take care of my brother and be his primary caretaker. So the philosophy was a melding of what I thought and felt maybe in 2014 and what I remembered thinking and feeling. So in 2014, my entering into the memory of myself as a boy, and the vast responsibility that I felt then about this matter. But Senses is a little different because Diver's Game is a little different because I felt that the essential link between the violence of the behavior that we have, for instance, buying something made out of plastic, or eating a steak, or going to a movie that is a Hollywood movie or whatever it is. These things are not like violent things, really, except that ultimately they are. And it's just a very long and delicate arm of violence that, nonetheless is violent. And so what we really need in modern society, I think, is a redefinition of what constitutes violent behavior and a new mode of ethics and morality.
And that was the domain you searched into for the diver's game.
Yeah.
What is violence? Was it important then that we have three different stories? Well, different. We have three stories, and a chapter in the end. We'll get to talking about that. But the three different stories are about the main characters are children. Why was it important that it are children? In so many ways, it is important. Name us a few.
Well, I think that adults are
So not children, adults.
often. Oh no, I mean they are about children, but I was saying adults are. We can, in some ways, we have to give up on adults, and the way forward is with children. You know, I think So the book is about children because it's the most hopeful part of the scenario in the first place. So I pick the darkest thing that I can, but then find the most hopeful part, you know. But as for why there are three sections, I think that we've come to a place in aesthetics, perhaps, where it has to be understood that
You told someone you're here?
It has to be understood that a single perspective is not correct.
Okay.
There is no single perspective that is correct, no matter how perfectly told. So I find that a more reasonable way to tell a story is to make perspectives that are as starkly different as I can and lean them against one another. Partially because I think that if a person reads a book and is affected by it, then the model of expressing truth that is in the book becomes a model that the person might use. And I think it's important to have models that are not morally reprehensible. And a morally reprehensible model would be to simply say, I, who am pure, know what the truth is.
Yeah.
But there is no such pure account.
But as a writer, did you ever doubt to? So you change from perspective. As a reader, it's not. We don't know what you're gonna do, right? When we're reading it, so you get into this story. The first story is half of the book, and you leave us hanging at a very important point, and then starts the second part, and then you feel, hey, give me my satisfaction. Where is the end of the first story? And you do it again with the second story, and you do it, well, in some way again with the third story. And then, of course, you were smart enough to see that things, we don't need the answers, of course. But it's a risk, in a way, to leave your readers at a point that is not unimportant.
Well, this goes back to, I don't think that the book should be entertainment. You know, so I don't want people to be titillated or entertained beyond what is strictly necessary to get them to read the thing in the first place.
Yeah, to don't put it aside. Yeah. No, but that's important too, of course. So, did you ever think of that risk? They might want to leave me here?
I'm sure they will.
You think some people will?
I think it's... there's a battle to write the best book that you can write, and then there's a battle to be read in your time. And maybe those are different battles.
Say that again?
There's a battle to be read in your own time and have an audience, and there's a battle to write as well as you can.
And you go for the second battle, right?
And those are different, those are different wars, I think. Maybe at one time not, I don't know, but it seems like it's always, I think the fact that good authors tend to remain through history, like you look back at the 15th century and there's the authors, most of the authors we read from then are good, but there was a lot of garbage then too. You know, it's mostly garbage. You know? So I think, it's fine that most of what people like is crap that makes them comfortable.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you should try to please people, and I don't believe so.
So no compromise, of course.
No compromise. I think that to a certain degree, a book, though, now, a novel, it has to contend with film and internet and whatnot. So I think that we can no longer, technically, the text, there are certain decisions that you have to make to be clearer and faster. I think that if one wrote a novel now in the style of, I don't know, Dostoevsky,
No, I was
it would
thinking
be,
the same thing, yeah.
it would probably not be much read,
Let's get back to the children.
Yeah.
Was it important that you start off with 2 girls and on the second story a girl? There's boys also, but you start off with girls.
Many of the characters in my books are not just these, but others are girls, and it's partially just that I think there was, historically insufficient representation of interesting girls in fiction. And then there's also the matter of the fact that I don't know here, but in the United States, a lot of the readers of literary fiction are women, and they like to read about girls, so that makes sense too. But then further, and maybe most importantly, the way that human sexuality, gender, the way it exists, it can be possible for a woman to operate within a female sphere, but then also to operate within and commandeer a male sphere and have power in both in a way that is maybe less fraught than a man doing the opposite. So just to take an example, if I took a male character and then I had a male character wearing a dress and doing some typical feminine activity, it's not that would be wrong, that would be fine.
It's an act.
I could certainly do it, but it would be meaningful in a way that I wouldn't necessarily want. And I think that for me, what's most interesting about human beings, at least and I appreciate authors for whom gender is the main thing, and it's quite beautiful to read, but for me, simply humanness beyond that is more interesting. And so maybe we could say, if we charted a course into the future and we said, let's say that philosophically humans come to interesting agreements and solutions to all the problems that we're presented with, and sort of merge slowly into a single unigender, where we all kind of look a little bit the same, I would postulate that thing that is ultimately ended up with, if we are to be in a peaceful and beautiful place, would be more like a woman than it is like a man. So then my character would be more like that.
I'm thinking about that. Okay. Why is that?
Well, it seems like if humans pacify the world, and they pacify the world partly through aggression and through the instruments of aggression, and I think through testosterone. And so maybe in the future, if we do continue past climate change and all these other things, maybe one thing that is different is that men have a thing that decreases how much testosterone comes into their bodies, so that you don't have all the brutality and whatnot. I don't know. It's really impossible to say.
Might be. The children then, the girls, because when you have children, you have education. There's a teacher in the book, and children are taught certain things, of course. Education is very important. You can teach them anything, right? Children. So it's hopeful, but then again, these children are not very innocent. Of course, children aren't innocent. When does that happen? When they're 1 year, 2 years? By birth?
There's a book that I wrote after this one, which hasn't yet come out, which is called The Children's Six. And it's about a city and it starts in this apartment, and there's a kind of a high-pitched noise that comes, and immediately all the adults, everyone over the age of 12, just has to smash their head into something and is killed. And so what we're left with then is only people below the age of 12 in the entire city. And our two protagonists, a boy and a girl who live in the apartment, have to make their way out of the city, like through this. And so it has to do with this feeling I have that all possible hope is with children in the future, but also with the fact that children have their own culture, a culture that is fundamentally different from the culture of adults. And actually, sadly, the present day internet culture and the use of screens and such things, and children not playing in playgrounds, has brought an end to what had quite a great amount of continuity. There are some really incredible books that are written about the continuity between games and rhymes that children use from the 20th century all the way back to the 13th, 14th century. Games and rhymes that when you're a child you know, but when you're an adult you've forgotten. So it's exchanged between children. One child exchanges it with another child, another child, and then another child, and then another. So it's this amazing to age out and forget an entire world that existed and for you was everything, you know, a world that would have had a continuity from, Flanders in 1200 and Los Angeles in 1940. The same rhymes, being said to a little boy on the side of a courtyard, and another boy comes out and he exchanges a rhyme, and the rhyme goes all the way unbroken just through children, never through the mouths of adults, for hundreds of years. It's quite amazing.
Does it also have to do with fantasy? Because I took out one little piece. To a boy, everything is fantasy, and the fantasy of a child is compelling. It is vivid, and it doesn't feel very different from real life, except that it can't persist. At some point it shatters, and the thing that was there all along remains. Is that what you're talking about? But with something else, right? Fantasy.
Yeah.
You wrote this, huh? I'm just...
I always come to my own words in a great deal of confusion.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
But I think fantasy is sort of a double-edged sword, I think, because on one hand, the imagination is what invigorates and delights, and for instance, to be in a partnership with another person and to have the delight of having a partner is that all the things you do for them and on their behalf are more joyously done than anything that you do for yourself. And so you get both the joys that are accorded you and the joys that you give to someone else, and it's marvelous, and that's based on the imagination and in a way on fantasy. But that's fantasy that is realized by the physicality of the other person and the fact that they receive the things that are given. But I think that there's a kind of a fantasy where the person who receives is in absentia and doesn't really exist. It's a fantasy. Sometimes that has led to the worst crises of mankind, brutal political nightmares of various kinds, from Nazis to Khmer Rouge to Julius Caesar, horrific, or the Catholic Church, horrific things throughout history, based upon fantasies. So it's double-edged. But also another wonderful thing about children to point out is it's not that they're intrinsically kind. In fact, they're very cruel. So it's a beautiful lens to show what is.
Can you understand that while reading at the beginning you read us the first page, that's why everybody can understand. I thought I was in the middle of a children's game. It starts with the hide and seek, and it kept resurfacing. Like, I thought maybe this is just one big organized game by children.
Well, from a technical perspective, that voice is a solution to a problem, which is that the more the more grotesque and the more difficult the material that you want to give to someone, the more gentle and, in a way, edible it has to be, you know. So one of the most brutal movies maybe that you could watch is this one called, what is it called? Grave of Fireflies. It's an anime. And so Grave of Fireflies is about these children. There's sort of like a nuclear problem in Japan. And there's these children are starving to death. And if this thing were filmed in live action, no one could ever watch it. But because it's a cartoon, it's possible to watch this horrific thing unfold. And so I knew that as I began the book, I knew I was going to be writing about violence. And so there had to be some kind of honeyed spoon with which I could feed it into the mouth. And so the voice of the narrator has this sort of lilt and ease and sort of joyfulness in order to effect the horrific business it will do.
Yeah. And also the spoon of sugar is actually the game of hide and seek, because when terrible things happen and people disappear, it might be hide and seek. It's only just a game.
That's right.
I was disturbed by the voice of the narrator, because he talked to me directly, and always at points where I didn't expect him to talk to me or her. Why was that necessary to directly talk to the reader every now and then?
Well, I think that the ultimate purpose of a book is not to affect a book is it's a treatment, it's a scheme of a thing. So it's pretending to be like a book about a train driver. You know, there's this train driver who goes and he drives his train, and then he comes back the next day and he drives his train again. But it isn't really about a train driver. Really, the writer, whomever it is speaking this philosophy, ultimately, a philosophy of life. And so the frame, whatever you say the book is about, at some point when you reach a needful thing that should be said, the frame of the book can be dispensed with in order to say the thing that should be said.
So it was the writer talking to me?
Not necessarily the writer, because hopefully, I mean, I think it can be almost a shamanistic or a mystical or religious thing, where the best hope that a writer could have is to say something he or she is not capable of saying. And the only way to say something that you're not capable of saying is to become someone else in the moment of speaking. So who it is that says the best things in books, I don't know. You know, presumably maybe it's in the zeitgeist. You know.
Yeah. But you talk about it a moment of speaking while it's writing, of course. Is there a big difference?
No, I don't think there is.
No?
I don't think there is.
But we can all speak, but we can't all write.
Oh, I think so. I think it is possible, and the main thing is to get out of one's own way. So the thing that obstructs, I think, everyone from writing quite beautiful books is just that the terms with which they view their lives are they're bound up in these commercial terms of language and the forcible terms of one kind or another of servitude. So one has to free oneself from those terms first before you can be the master of the language that you use.
And free oneself of oneself also?
And definitely. That's the first.
How do you do that?
That's the first part. I think it's by not being able to do anything else. So most writers, it wasn't their choice. They tried to do everything else and failed.
No, that's not true. No, that's too easy. How do you free yourself from yourself?
Ultimately, it's partly to keeping your eyes open and realizing that I don't really believe that there is a self.
Okay.
And I think that what is most interesting about people is the joined nature of interaction, and whether that's a person and a banister, or a person and a tree, or two trees, the interaction between things. Only in interacting do we become anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the interactions and their arising, that constitutes the beauty. So then to write is just to write about things you observe.
Yeah. When did you discover that you were the person doing that?
I started writing poems in high school. I wanted to be a poet.
Why?
I think that I felt so language, like if I here we are, and there's the famous example that I'm about to say you're all aware of, but so we're just all in this room, and then I say the word elephant, and now there's an elephant in the room,
standing in between us. Yeah.
So I think the way in which language and naming can call things into being is incredibly powerful. And I was a very sort of fearful child, and I think maybe too gentle for my own good. And it seemed like an amazing tool to be able to write a poem about a tree, and then be able to take the tree with you where you go.
That gentle boy wrote some horrific stuff and tried to understand what violence is, right? Is that one of the main things you want us to, or you wanted to explore? What is violence and what is the place of violence in our society? Have you found an answer?
I think it's the society is stitched through with it. I think it's everywhere, but I also think that there's an extraordinary amount of beauty also. I mean, the books, I think, there's always brutality, because that's real, but then there's always moments of hope, I think, too. Actually, maybe this is a good point for this, because this sort of touches on the similar idea. So,
does it need more introduction, or just?
I'm gonna So the this book is a book I'm writing right now. So I started a few days ago, and I'm about 2/3 through. So I will be done in a few days. I took a break just to come here and do this reading for you. And the book is about a film. So there's a film which is the book is called Comedy of the Bones of Your Face, and the book is about a film, and the film is called Upon Whom Do You Play Your Prank? And that film is made from an Italian film, out of the parts of an Italian film, recomposed. And the Italian film is called What Ill Befalls. And that was a spaghetti western from the 70s. And so the book analyzes the interactions between the different films, the biography of the different filmmakers, and the collective that is making the most recent of the films. The most recent of the films, which is the one Upon Whom Do You Play Your Prank? The characters, which were two American Civil War deserters who sort of roamed through this landscape trying to get away from war in the original Italian film, which was 14 hours long. This is not a real film. In the version that was done by the collective, they've had heads painted onto their shoulders. So the heads that are painted onto the negative, one is the head of a donkey or a mule, the head of a mule, and the other is the head of a wolf. So these characters are named Abelard, who is the mule, and Heloise, who is the wolf. Wolf Heloise. So at this point, Abelard is about to tell us. There's a thing in philosophy and in science as well, where a mechanism of something is spoken about with as a daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N in English. I don't know what it is in any other language, but a daemon. So it would be like Maxwell's daemon. It has to do with like heat and energy. There's different daemons that are used to show a process. So when the word demon is here, it's not demon as like a minion of Mephistopheles, or remember it. Okay, that's the explanation. When we consider fate, which does not exist as a link or path, but only as a past fact, not the rain coming, but the wet of the rain that has come, we may wonder at the fate of our pair and how dark the day is. Is there the light of even a single candle, the reflected eyes of even one cat creeping along a balustrade? I will recall to you now that Abelard, earlier, in the long ago scene on the battlefield, was speaking to himself, and what he was saying then was something like the following. The sack demon, the sack demon. He rummages amongst the bodies, eagerly glistening with a joy like a shed skin. In his mule's mouth mutters the trailing thread of his mind. If I may posit an agent or a demon to a process which we know very well is agentless, demonless, yet if we know very well that the mechanism may, with the advent of the demon, be more legible, more available to the intellect, then perhaps it is worthwhile to consider the progress through life of a man as the progress through life of a man with a demon sitting on his shoulders. The demon is holding a burlap sack, and mostly the sack is over the man's head. But sometimes the demon removes it a moment and allows the man to breathe. Then shortly thereafter the sack is over the head. The man continues forward. It is a rocky landscape, the ground is even. Often the man falls, attempts to rise. Sometimes he feeds himself with food he finds. When he does so with a covered head, he takes no joy in the food, which seems to be mashed into the fiber of the bag, seems not to make it into his mouth. Neither does the water he drinks at such time reach his throat. Only on those rare occasions when the demon has lifted the sack and the man finds food, finds water, can he eat and drink. Only at such times can he regard the others who struggle over the landscape to his left and right with anything like joy. Which is not to say that he is not sometimes convinced of his own joy while the bag is upon his head. For we might see, if we watch, that he capers on, howling with something pale, like happiness, in the darkness of the sack. And we see that his hunger for the food he stuffs fruitlessly against the cloth that partitions off his mouth does not abate, yet still he stuffs it, however it might fall to the ground. That in the moments when the sack is off his head, he can see what is happening to the others, can express worry over their situation, can try to do something to help, is largely meaningless. For any gesture that the man makes towards his fellows results in the sack descending promptly into place. His own legs spur him forward in his horrid and inevitable gallop towards nothing and nowhere.
Okay, a few things. Because when you started, it wasn't easy for us, I think, because we don't have the text and we listen. It was a very different rhythm than the beginning of Diver's Game.
Yeah, all the books are different.
Yeah. But also in reading and rhythm. But then again, it's in the end, I think I understand in a way why you said this might be a good moment to to read this part, because we were talking about violence, I think, and how you try to search into what it is. Is this also about empathy?
Definitely. But also about how sad it is. The saddest of all the human facts is how little of our lives we obtain because of just being asleep. You have 5 minutes in the afternoon when you're actually alive, and then you go into unconscious behavior for some hours, and then a few minutes in the evening.
And wait a second, you write a book in how many days? Then in how many minutes you do that?
Well,
wait, we're only alive for 5 minutes during the day?
I think we're only like feeling and perceiving in a full way, seeing what's before us. And then we go into unconscious behavior, and you get into a cab, and then all of a sudden you're halfway through eating your dinner. And then there's darkness, and then there you are, getting into bed, having brushed your teeth. And the time in between is just a gulf that you can hardly look into.
And I was looking very intently, and I was here, not unconsciously, I think, but I might be wrong. So how does that? So I asked you, is this also about empathy? And you said yes, definitely, but also about.
Well, just about the fact that if we are to empathize with someone else, just probabilistically, it would have to match up with a period when you were acting consciously in your body and not unconsciously.
But there's a woman here at the end of the novel who changes everything in the novel for me.
Yes.
She feels empathy, only for 5 minutes, maybe
That's
less.
right.
But she's seen a true face of empathy. That's not easy, right?
Yeah, that scene is that 5 minutes for her, that casts her entire life into focus.
And it's unbearable.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a very stupid question. Like, I think if you go out for drinks, you're a lot of fun. Is that true?
No, I'm a joyful.
You're joyful, aren't you?
I'm a joyful, happy person.
Yeah. I
I
can tell. People might think otherwise because what you say is very.
Well, those are just the
engaging
facts.
and yeah.
Those are just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, you don't just answer a question. You really answer a question. I'm not used to that.
I can tell jokes too.
No. Please don't tell jokes. You talked about the US a few times, not in a very nice way. Abelard and Eloise are here. I mean, you feel the recognition when you say those names. People say, it's like they're ours, they're European, you know. Do you like Europe? Do you think it's better here?
No, I don't think it's better.
Because otherwise I would have to disappoint you.
No, I don't think it's better. And to a certain degree, I don't believe that the past was better either. I think we have. There are always these petty potentates who are in charge and doing their cruelties, and this is for all of time. And certainly, we're speaking about women. You know, in some ways, the situation of women is better now than in the past. You know, in many ways. You know, maybe. I mean, I guess there's a theory that in prehistory, when there are just scavenger groups sort of roaming, that at that time possibly the situation for women was more egalitarian in these, you know, sort of anarchist scavenger groups. I don't know. It's hard to say. You know, I think I wasn't there. You know, but certainly the war against women that has been going on for the entirety of history, maybe in some places is slightly better now, and also for people of different other genders and sexualities, that would be the only thing that's better now, yeah, than in the past. But for animals, it's drastically worse than at any other time. You know.
Is that why there are bees tattooed around the whole of your body? I think. I presume. I don't know. I haven't seen it.
There are 250 of them.
250.
Yeah.
Why 250?
It was by chance.
By chance.
Yeah. But the whole thing is, I have a friend who's a tattoo artist. And
you wouldn't say.
And the thing that stops people from having being covered as I am in tattoos is not having a friend that is a tattoo artist. So once you have a friend who's a tattoo artist who will just give you tattoos for free, and if you like to, you know, lie back on the grass and think of ideas for tattoos, and then you find the next day that you already have the tattoo, it's been etched into you. So that's sort of I have no real space left on my body from this friendship.
Does it feel does it feel different? Does your body feel different than before you had them?
Well, I'm Buddhist, so I think that it's a rotting skin sack.
Mm-mm. Okay. That's a happy thought.
No, it is a happy thought because you don't reside in it. You
Yeah.
reside in empathy and the feelings of the light flickering over there. I don't have to be in my body.
There's just one thing you won't get away with. You just said, I've started to write it a few days ago and I need 2 more days. I just came here and then it's finished. It's not that I don't want to believe you, but you understand that it's difficult to believe. I've interviewed a few writers and most people take longer.
If you visit the apartment in Amsterdam, I will show you all the pages on the floor and the notes on the wall. And
Okay. But does it always happen like that? Like in a fit?
Yes. Well, at first I started as a poet, and so as poetry is this way that you can just be overcome by an idea and then express it, especially not so much epic poetry, but lyrical poetry. Often it can be this way. And so I think I just thought, well, maybe it's possible to write a novel this way. And then it turned out that it is.
But is that the first time that it happens like this?
No, it's this way for
Always.
all the novels. But I think that it's possible if you just are not embarrassed and are not afraid of what people will think. So the general opinion of, I think, my work is so low that it's okay to just do whatever I want.
That's not
and
true.
it's okay.
That's not true.
Well, the people who like it, and then the other people
That's
don't
important.
like it.
Right? That's what counts.
But there are very few, You can throw a rock and never hit one, wherever you...
If in a few days we come in Amsterdam in the apartment, is it finished? Okay, then it's finished. Do you get back to it, or is it like okay?
No, that's it. It's like this. I just read it to you. It's all like that. It's all. It's because I don't think that. I'm not trying to make the polish that a phrase has should be sufficient for me to communicate an image that was in my heart and my mind, but it doesn't need to be sufficient to deceive you into thinking something like, this is Jesse's masterwork or something. And if I was like writing the novel trying to make my masterwork, right, then I would have 2 goals. One goal would be to write an excellent novel, and the other goal would be to deceive. And I think that if you just want to put something down as plainly and as clearly as possible, as simply as possible, then you just put the things down, and then you think of, you're walking around, you think of something else, and then you put that down, and you walk around, you think and put something down. And actually, I think anybody, whatever it is, like let's imagine that a book is, 230 pages or something, and that's like, in terms of typing, that's not even typing for 10 hours a day for 6 days. Anybody can type that fast. It's not, you don't have to type particularly fast. It's just being careful and putting things down one after another.
Then what does it feel like you're kind of a medium?
Definitely. I never have any idea what it will be, but then as I'm walking around, so then I go back and I reread what I wrote the day before, and then ideas come and I add to it, and then the next, and I keep, it's sort of like a constant cannibalization as I'm going again through it and adding sections. And these, it's really kind of laughable that this gets to be called a novel, because as you see, the pages are like largely empty, so.
And what is it, a folktale? what would you call it?
Well, it's a philosophy, a philosophy, not philosophy with a big P, but just a practical philosophy, or an intervention, maybe.
Any questions on the interventions of Jesse Ball? They're very welcome, you said, right?
Oh yeah, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Can't be that I asked them all, really. Yeah.
Or not as good? Oh, I don't think that. I think they're both equally bad. Oh no, I like Europe very much, and I think the tradition of literature is much stronger.
Better also?
Better.
Yeah. Stronger or only stronger? I mean, in the meaning of better, do you like European writers more?
Most of the writers I like are dead, but I think the work, we were just talking about this earlier, that I think a lot of American literature is about culture, and a lot of the best European literature is about existential being. And so I happen to have the taste to be more interested in that.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, there are many things I love about Europe, of course.
You're not obliged to say that. It's okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
The question.
I was asking how he was feeling being translated in different languages.
It's a strange feeling, I think, but to be published at all, to publish a book at all, is very, very strange in the first place, because it feels enormous, like this huge thing. And when I published my first book of poems, I thought that, I don't know what I thought maybe I would be recognized on the street or something. Of course, I mean, there's not even, no one has any, it makes no difference at all. You could publish, a book of poems, and you have to keep your job, at the pizza place or whatever. There's no difference. But I think that I felt it was going to be completely enormous, and I think indeed it is enormous. But the enormity is not to have the work be translated or to have the work be published by a publisher, but just to write and exchange a written thing with other human beings. And I think as soon as, with my students, we talk about this, that you have to make the decision that your book is a book, and that the poem is a poem, or that the story is a story, and it cannot be further legitimized. Nothing that happens, the Nobel Prize, or God forbid, whatever these things that Bob Dylan gets or whatever, that doesn't legitimize anything. The thing that legitimizes feeling is the bones and sinew and the vibration of the thing that speaks the sentiment. It's legitimized by the nature of being, and it cannot be any more legitimized by 1,000 people carried around in their back pockets. So I think it's a grace and a lucky thing to have the work pass away from you. It's not yours once you write it. I don't think the books are mine anymore, but it's pleasurable to think that they go into other languages and other people can make of them what they will.
Do you like teaching?
I don't like colleagues, and I don't like meetings. But the classroom is wonderful. Students are wonderful.
Why?
Why don't I like meetings?
No. We can relate to that. No, what is so good about the students and the interaction and that?
Well, unfortunately, the classes in the U.S., I don't know here, but are about 3.5 months long, and so you get a class, and then after 3.5 months they go, which I think is too short. I would prefer if they could be the full year long. And the reason is that when you get a group of people and you can have them together all being interested in something like, Agatha Christoph or Kafka or some, literary figure or an activity. I sometimes teach classes that would be about walking or dreaming or something like this. When you can get a group of people who are all devoted to some, beautiful idea, then they enter the room, and for me, the space of the classroom is very special, because I don't know anything about their lives. Some of them have very difficult lives. They could have horrific lives, and it could be that the class, the space of the classroom, that I create is the only really safe place where they get to exist as a person. And that the rest of their life, they have to be kind of in hiding, like defending themselves at all times. And so to have the opportunity and the responsibility to create a space in which, not through rules and not through authority, but just through your behavior and how you listen and how you talk to people, to try to create a conviviality and an atmosphere among the students where they support each other and create a kind of a buffer that then, when they leave the class, they can take with them to try to be more valorous in their own lives and do things that they wouldn't be capable of doing. That's the thing that feels really good, I think.
Mm. That's the little boy again who thought he had to be responsible for the rest of his life, right?
That's right.
Someone else. We're done? Oh no, go ahead. Sure, maybe two.
You said that you were sometimes also giving classes on walking. What are you talking about, and what are you teaching on walking?
Well, when I first got this job at an art institute in Chicago, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, they wanted me to teach classes about writing, but I felt like if someone was going to be a writer, they would love to read, and they would read a lot already. And if someone was going to be a writer, they would write a lot. And if I take someone's short story and change the lines and show them how to fix it, I don't think it really helps that much. I think that that's something that a person has to learn to do for himself or for herself. And I can't actually tell what the most important part of someone else's story is. They ultimately need to be able to tell that for themselves through all the days and years of their trying to write, you know. However, I think that the principal place of revision of the real work that a person can do is in creating a beautiful train of thought in your mind where you're, as we were talking about, you're trying to see clearly just what's around you. And so one of the ways to do that is to be more rigorous in your day-to-day life about just trying to see and perception more than the technical process of making. And so if I take a thing like the act of walking, so my students in Chicago might just not walk that much, or they might travel between 2 or 3 points every day. It's always the same 2 or 3 points when there's a whole city. And as I said before, I don't believe that you are just yourself, independent of everything. I think that you are the commonality between yourself and other things. And each relationship of yourself with other things is another iteration of the possible being that you could have. So if I make a student go and I make them go on many, many walks all around Chicago, encountering things that they wouldn't encounter, having to be in situations that they wouldn't otherwise, like having to go on a 5-hour walk with no telephone and no money, just out. And if it happens that you need a drink of water, you have to ask someone for it, you know? All of a sudden, people are coming up with many ideas for writing that they would never have had, you know? And in fact, I think enjoying their lives more. So the class about walking is, it's a pleasure, and it's not me teaching anyone anything. It's the students teaching themselves.
I was also really amazed by the thing that you said, that you write a book so shortly. So I also wondered, do you ever regret writing something? Because when I write something years ago in a whim, I would be like years after, oh my God, what the hell did I write now? So I was wondering if you ever had that, because you have written a lot of books in a short amount of time.
No, I think that each book is just for a different group of people. And so it can easily be that I cease to be the audience for a book that I wrote in the past, you know. I think, well, to take an example, like the first novel that I wrote, which was the second one that came out, is called The Way Through Doors. And this is a book that is all about story, like story before anything. It's almost like a Scheherazade kind of Russian nesting doll of story within story within story, a swirl of as if the imagination truly were the thing that could save the world, you know. And I think that for me, at that point in my life, I had had various different tragedies and things, as we all do. But for me, the thing that allowed me to continue was really story and imagination. And so the book is kind of a paean to story as a solution, and imagination and the delights of that. Nowadays, I don't feel that the aesthetic and the whatever story is in human culture historically, from Homer on down, and all the different possibilities that story affords. To me, this is no longer as interesting as it was then, as the sole subject for a book. So although I haven't reread it in a long time, but I could say probably that I'm less an audience for that than for other things. So, but I don't regret having written it. I'm sure there are still young people who love story who would like it very much. Yeah.
We're done? It's okay for you?
Sure.
Would you be... Yeah, go ahead.
Just out of curiosity, have you ever envisaged making your novels, bringing them on stage, like theater? Is that because I think your novels, they contain like very vivid and strong images. So maybe contemporary theater would be. It's just.
I've written some screenplays, and I wrote a play that is for a man and a cat. So. Thank you.
Okay. Would you be so kind to sign your books if people feel like buying one?
Sure.
They're here in Dutch, I think, and in English, whatever you want. Thank you very much, Jesse Ball, and thank you for listening.